right, Don, this is 11.2, the politics of war. Okay, so there's a lot of political issues that surround the Civil War, constitutional issues that Lincoln has to grapple with, the South has to grapple with. So we're going to talk about how those kind of arise in the war and what that was like, and what divides Americans in the North, in the South, all over the place over the war, right? And how the war is being fought and things are going on. Okay, so there's a few diplomacy fails. If you remember the South's King Cotton diplomacy, the idea that their giant cotton crop is going to help them secure the backing of Britain and France and other European powers that rely on their cotton. Right? The North is desperately trying to keep Britain out of the war. It actually stops two British diplomats two Southern diplomats headed to Britain on the ship the Trent, which causes a little diplomatic kerfuffle between the United States and Britain. And also we have the Alabama, right? So the Alabama is a ship that the British were building for the Confederacy that was designed to ram through the Union frigates and break the blockade, right? If it had built, it could have been a major blow to the ability of the North to blockade the South. Britain decides to stay out of the war for a number of reasons. One, the Union Army, Lincoln basically threatens to invade Canada. And Britain is also relying almost more on northern wheat exports than southern cotton.
And there are a couple other things that go into Britain's decision to stay neutral. The wheat was a big deal. The wheat from the north was something Britain really needed. Additionally, they were able to find cotton sources from India and North Africa. So the issue here, specifically Egypt. At the beginning of the war, the South thought they would be able to use King Cotton to basically leverage the North and hopefully Britain into supporting their war effort, just like the French did with the colonists against Britain in the Revolutionary War. And we saw that the North, or I should say the Confederacy, invaded the North at Antietam, and they will later do it again at Gettysburg to help bolster their argument for Britain to support them. But because Britain was able to find cotton in other areas, they decided to stay neutral. Additionally, the impact of Uncle Tom's Cabin and the social effect cannot be understated. The people of Britain were against slavery, and they did not like the fact that the Confederacy was fighting to maintain slavery. This was a sticking point for British leadership. And after the Emancipation Proclamation was declared, that turned the war effort from a war to save the Union to a war to get rid of slavery, that was the death knell of the Confederate hopes of the British joining them. Because now that it became a war over slavery, there's no way Britain will join them. After Britain decides to stay neutral, the Union decides to step up the gas on the Anaconda Plan, fully blockading the Atlantic coast and the coast of the Gulf to keep the Confederates from really trading much of anything through any port. Additionally, Grant is moving down the Mississippi, and other Union forces, Farragut and others, are moving up the Mississippi to meet. And ideally, soon, for the Union, they will blockade the coast and take the Mississippi.
The majority of the 1862-1863 cotton crop rots on the docks in southern ports.
Yeah, because they're not able to send it out anywhere. And this will be the beginning of the end for the Confederacy.
Okay, so the issue of the Emancipation Proclamation is decreed after the Battle of Antietam, and it's going to take effect on January 1st, 1863. But it has its roots in this idea of contraband, right? So as the North is fighting, particularly in the Peninsula Campaign, right, they're realizing that slaves are running away, and originally they would send the slaves back. They said, look, the North didn't want to try to totally cripple like Southern property owners. They were trying to fight a limited war, but as the war dragged on, the war kind of got worse. They kind of realized that they needed to cripple the Southern economy, which based on, even more than cotton, was based on slavery. So Union generals started treating slaves as contraband and as property that is going to be taken from Southern property holders, which are going to try to undermine the Southern war effort, right? Slaves, again, are very versatile. They can build forts, they can build camps, they can transport things for the army, right? Slaves are being used in the Southern war effort, and if we can take slaves out of that equation, it's going to hurt the South.
And the idea behind it is that Abraham Lincoln, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, being president, he's also commander-in-chief of the armed forces, He has the right to do this. This is a war declaration, or an act of war. By confiscating the property of your enemy, you don't have to ask Congress to do that during war. So Abraham Lincoln feels like he is within his constitutional authority to do this. Many critics point out that they believe he is extending his constitutional authority, avoiding Congress and basically making a unilateral declaration in order to prevent any political haggling that would go on when trying to pass this. Now, the myth is that Abraham Lincoln freed all of the slaves on January 1st, 1863. But it wasn't that simple. Because he was declaring this as commander-in-chief, he could only free the slaves in Confederate states. Therefore, the 4 border states, Delaware, Maryland, Missouri, and Kentucky, still were able to maintain their slaves. Additionally, just because Abraham Lincoln said the slaves were free didn't mean they were actually free. The Union had to take over different lands and emancipate the slaves as they marched through the South. And Abraham Lincoln was hoping eventually this will lead to total emancipation for all slaves in the United States.
The day it was issued, not a single slave was free, right? And you also see, like, the North, the border states are kind of a sticky problem. They're trying to find ways to easily emancipate the slaves. They actually offered Delaware, it's such a small state, they decided that they were trying to figure out emancipation plans through Delaware. And they offered to buy all the slaves in Delaware for full market value, which was less than $2,000, and Delaware said no. So the slave border states were holding on to slavery, and they were very committed to it. So it's important to remember how touchy the Emancipation Proclamation really was to the Northern Coalition. All right, Copperheads. Right, not everyone in the North was totally enthusiastic about fighting this war, especially as it got bloodier and deadlier, right? And we start seeing the emergence of Copperheads, and basically these are anti-war, mostly Democrats. A Copperhead is a poisonous snake, right? So if you look at this cartoon, you can see these people are being compared to poisonous snakes that endanger the Union, right? And a lot of them have some political success, but eventually the North starts to coalesce around winning the war.
And what they really show more than anything is that reality that we told you about in 11.1. It's this idea that not everyone in the North is an abolitionist, not everyone in the North is in favor of the Union's cause, just like not everyone in the South is in favor of secession. Abraham Lincoln had to deal with these Copperheads and secessionists and people spewing political vitriol that was making his job a lot harder. He had to deal with them in Baltimore. We talked about what he did there in suspending habeas corpus. And it became very difficult for him, and actually the election of 1864, when Lincoln was reelected, was a much more difficult election than many would think. He wasn't even sure he would be reelected in 1864 because of all the Copperheads in the North. Now, many Confederates criticized Abraham Lincoln for suspending habeas corpus and shutting down any type of dissent, including Jefferson Davis in the Confederacy. But over time, he realized he had to deal with the same type of dissent. And he suspended habeas corpus and did basically the exact same actions that Abraham Lincoln did in the North in the South. But the bigger problem is that no one really respected Jefferson Davis and no one really listened to him, which made his job a lot harder. Additionally, as the war dragged on, Lincoln and Davis both realized they were in need of more manpower. While an overwhelming majority of soldiers in both the North and the South were volunteer soldiers, the North and the South both implemented conscription, which is the ability to draft someone into war. The average age, I believe in the North it was 20 to 45, and in the South 18 to 35, so middle-aged men could be drafted into it. You could choose someone to replace you, which tens of thousands did in the North and the South, or you could pay a fee or a fine which could get you out of it. And many began to claim that this was a rich man's war and a poor man's fight, because if you were wealthy, you could buy your way out of fighting. But if you were poor, you had to put your life on the line for the cause.
Especially in the South, where if you owned, I think it was like 5 or 10 slaves, you were immune from the draft.
Yeah.
So basically, anyone that was a major slave owner didn't actually have to go and fight. While the poor in the southern states, especially who were being more unionist, more against slavery, more against secession, they would have been the ones fighting the war.
Yeah, and that's important to keep in mind because the Confederacy realizes the only way to win this war is to keep the production of cotton going so they can use it for trade leverage. And if they take all the plantation owners away from their plantation, that is going to retard the progress of the growth of cotton and the shipment of goods and supplies for the war. All right, if you have any questions, please ask your history teacher. Thanks for watching.